Hi, this is Peter Godinez, your ambassador with K80Y TV. We have a special edition going on here. It's a very important topic that we want to make sure you're informed and you hear both sides. And that's the Measure M going on in the city of Port Hueneme. And we have Tom Figg here, who's going to inform us, educate us on what he knows about the subject. So Tom, thank you for your knowledge in advance. Why don't you tell us the story?
Thank you, Peter. Again, I'm Tom Figg. I'm a candidate for the City Council. First, I want to make it abundantly clear is that I embrace the intent of Measure M. That's not the question. The city is in financial need. It has an outdated business license ordinance. I believe in the principles of fairness and equity. My problem is that the measure as written doesn't measure up to those standards. Probably the thing that people need to begin with is truly to understand the mechanics of the ordinance. And it is posted on the city's website. I encourage you to read it. It really isn't that complicated. The things that are most important for the public to know is that if the measure passes, the voters approve it, the maximum tax rates that are proposed in that ordinance become effective. We've heard a lot about, well, you know, after the ordinance is passed, the City Council will make adjustments and it will try to achieve some sort of compromise or fairness. The reality is the ordinance sets maximum rates and they become effective upon adoption. Now, the ordinance does allow for the council afterwards to make downward adjustments, but they're not compelled to do that. And they can't assure anyone what those adjustments might be because we don't know who's going to be on the City Council come November 4th. So it's a little misleading to suggest that the trust me factor, I kind of equate it to the Animal House kind of decorum, that you screwed up, you trusted me. I think that there's enough disinformation that people should think twice about voting for a measure, not knowing how it's going to ultimately play out. The measure was crafted without the involvement of the people that are going to be most affected, the Navy, the Harbor, and the business community. They were not consulted in advance of this measure being placed on the ballot. The city acknowledges it didn't do its homework. Its staff reports that led to the authorization of this ballot measure is inconclusive as to what the impacts are going to be. It's sold as a concept of everybody pays their fair share, and yet without the analysis, there's no way of knowing how these maximum tax rates equate to fairness and equity. It's said that the intent of the ordinance is to offset the impacts of businesses. Again, without the analysis, how do we know that the amount of taxes that are being collected are truly going to offset the impacts of those individual businesses? The measure on its face is inequitable because it creates a discriminatory treatment of businesses, specifically small businesses. Now, I don't mind that small businesses get a break, but don't characterize this ordinance as something that it isn't. It isn't equitable. On the face, it's discriminatory. I'm really troubled by the non-responsiveness of the council to engage in meaningful discussion of the issues. I'm offended by villainizing people that take exception to their initiative. Instead of engaging those people in discussion of the issues, there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of name calling. That's not productive. That doesn't address the issues. The council has tried to say that it had no other alternative than to structure the ordinance the way it is. That is, that it has to be based on the maximum tax rates the day that it's adopted. And I take exception with that. There are other ways to meet the requirements of Proposition 218 that deals with these kinds of circumstances, voter-approved initiatives involving fees and taxes. This ordinance could establish the rates up front that are relevant to each of the business categories, rather than just arbitrarily taking a maximum dollar amount, and that's what goes into effect on day one. So I guess in summary, the ordinance simply doesn't match up to what it's being advertised as being. If it's really here to help small businesses, then advertise it as such. If it's here to pick the pockets of large multinational corporations, then call it as such. But don't characterize it as something that it isn't, and it isn't equitable. So what's my suggestion is, again, getting back to what I said at the very beginning, I understand the necessity of a measure that does adjust business licensing taxes, but it needs to be rebuilt. And what I would propose is a replacement ordinance that first and foremost begins with talking with the very people that are going to be most affected. Secondly, we need to establish what the impacts are going to be of those businesses and how the nexus between what you're going to charge in the way of taxes versus the impacts that you're supposedly going to offset with that revenue. Thirdly, we really need to take into account all of the revenue potential that comes from those businesses. For instance, in the case of the Harbor District, there are already revenue sharing agreements in place with the city that already account for some of the business impacts, like truck traffic on the street, police activities and enforcement at the harbor. Those services, in large part, are already accounted for in these revenue sharing agreements. Now, I understand that there's a dispute at present regarding the mechanics of those agreements, and it's worthy to revisit those things. But when you begin to set taxes on a business license basis, and you say that you really only want to collect taxes to the extent necessary to offset the impacts of those businesses, then all sources of revenues that directly or indirectly come from those businesses should be accounted for in the development of a business licensing ordinance. So, in conclusion, I think the community deserves better. I think our business community needs to have that dialogue with the council, and I would certainly advocate for a redo of this measure, but not as it's currently structured. Thank you.
I'm Tom Figg. This is Peter Godinez with KADY TV, and until next time.